Bonjour tout le monde. Good afternoon, everybody. Je suis extrêmement heureux de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour une nouvelle conférence virtuelle du CDTS et notre dernière de cet automne, avant que nous reprenions en janvier. I am delighted to welcome you today for a new virtual talk and the last one of the fall season before, of course, we start again in January. For those who don't know me, my name is Florian Martin Barito. I am an associate professor and the University Research Chair in Technology and Society at the University of Ottawa, as well as the director of the University of Ottawa Center for Law, Technology and Society. Today's virtual talk is presented thanks to the support of the Law Foundation of Ontario as part of the Community Leadership in Justice Fellowship on Smart Cities that was awarded to our center to host Jean-Noël André since 2018. Jean-Noël André is the executive director of Open North, ou Nord Ouvert en français, Canada's leading nonprofit organization specialized in open data that researches and advocates for open smart cities. For the past 2 years, while leading Open North's transformative work on smart cities and open government, Jean-Noël has examined, as part of his fellowship, poor relation in a smart city ecosystem, in particular the role and influence of citizens. And so as part of this fellowship, he has hosted various workshops with stakeholders, including one this morning, to discuss some of the deliverables in preparation. And for today's virtual talk, is joined by some of Canada's thought leaders to engage in kind of a yearly review of citizen agency in the realm of data and technology, and of course, smart cities. So today, beyond Jean-Noël, you will hear from Dr. Tracy Loriot, an associate professor in the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. She's also a board member of Open North, and I'm also delighted to say that she's an associate member of our center. You will also hear from Stéphane Guidouin, who is the director of the Laboratoire d'Innovation Urbaine de Montréal, so the Urban Innovation Lab at the City of Montreal in Quebec, and from Bianca Willich, who is an open government advocate that I'm sure you all have heard and read about smart cities. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Jean-Noël, to kick off the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today.
Thank you, Florian, and thank you to Ottawa U for being able to have me do my fellowship, as well as the Ontario Law Foundation to support me over the last 2 years. So the topic for today is a big one because it's been a very, very big year. And the idea is to do a bit of a year in review for 2020 from the perspective of citizen agency in smart cities. So the virtual conversation that we're having today, as you can see from the speakers that we have, brings together different perspectives, right? We've got, academic perspective, public administration and city perspective, as well as advocate perspective. But I think when we talk about smart cities and agency, I think each of us have been agents in our own ways within and outside of government as well, through different experiences and different kind of fields of practices. This year, so in terms of the framing for this conversation, we're going to be looking at digital rights issues in the government's response to the pandemic. Tracy has done a lot of research in that space. We're going to look at city building issues, such as the SidewalkLabs decision to withdraw from the Quayside project, with Bianca, who's been a key leader in participating and leading, some of the response to SidewalkLabs. Involvement in the City of Toronto, as well as opportunities coming from Montreal's unique approach to openness in smart cities as the recipient of the top prize for the Smart Cities Challenge with Infrastructure Canada. So the way that we're going to do this, what I've done is that, I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to invite each of the three speakers, and unfortunately, Teresa Scassa wasn't able to come today. So what we'll do is that I'm going to ask the same question for each of the panelists, and then I'm going to kind of tap one of the the panelists or the speakers to kind of expand a little bit on that particular question. And we're just going to work through the questions in that way. So each of you will have more time kind of to, you know, in an area that you've been most involved in to be able to kind of say more and also maybe react to some of the reactions to some of the comments from your colleagues here. So let's begin. We'll start with Tracy, then Stéphane, and then Bianca for this one. And Tracy, you'll have the opportunity to expand afterwards, so you don't need to say everything right away. You've got a little bit some bonus time there. So let's start with more of a general question. What does citizen agency in smart cities mean to you, and why does it matter, or why has it mattered in particular in 2020? So let's start with Tracy, please.
Well, I was listening to Radio-Canada last night as I was marking, and one of the things that came up was this has been the year where science is on the agenda. Everybody's talking about science and everybody's talking about data, and people are learning about models, and our language has changed, right? Flattening the curve, et cetera, is now part of our vernacular, as part of our day-to-day language. As a response to that, what we've seen is some really interesting initiatives across the country, especially in cities, especially in public health offices, where we're seeing dashboards where we didn't see dashboards before. We're talking social determinants of health where we didn't talk about social determinants of health in such a public way before. We are beginning to have conversations about smart technologies and racialization and racism and equity issues in our cities as a result of what has happened in the US, and also doing some soul searching of how we're doing here, but also because different groups have been disaffected differently. And so what we are beginning to observe is people realizing that data matter, that science matters, that models matter, that our institutions that we trust, such as public officers of health, matter, and we trust that they're going to communicate with us in a way that's going to be useful for us. And I think it sets a nice bar for a form of not direct engagement always, but there has been quite a bit of engagement. I'm thinking of Stéphane and his wonderful work on analyzing a lot of these data. But what we're starting to see is groups realizing that there is a role for them to play in a smart city, that the smart city is not just a traffic management system, it's a whole bunch of systems, and one of those systems being dashboards and open data and licensing and the communication of that. I'll leave it for that for now.
That's fantastic. Thank you for breaking the ice, briser la glace, comme on dit. So let's go over to Stéphane and then Bianca. Stéphane.
Yeah, so I would continue on the fact that for the past years, the data has been becoming more and more scrutinized as they are being used by private organizations. And sometimes there's a question of what public bodies are doing about that. So in the past year for Montreal, we mainly worked releasing, for example, a data charter to try to set the stage for a discussion around that and what could be the role of government. And well, I'm for a city, but the thing is true also for provincial and federal governments to see how we can engage. And for us, basically, the charter is a way to frame or to propose a frame for the discussion, which at one point is about individual rights and agency and somehow freedom and dignity is a large part of that, and how we can try to think about all those high-level questions when thinking about data. And on the other hand, how we can have a collective view of what data is, what it could bring to a large group of people, and how it can be seen as a common, as a public good that we have to govern together.
Excellent, thank you. Bianca, over to you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all for starting the conversation. I'm a little to a lot scrambled these days, so I try to bring myself, in all honesty, into these conversations. And so bear with me. I think this might be the messiest part of what I share today to answer this question. I think thinking about agency, I'm thinking a lot about relationships to others. And so my agency, but also what is that in relationship to others and their agency, and what is the collective? And I think So what is our collective agency, which is building on these themes, but also thinking about in this moment, and I was able to join this wonderful conversation between Dion Brand and Ronaldo Walcott recently, and they were talking about the Canadian innocence being reborn anew every time there's crisis, and in this pandemic. And I think I just want to speak to that in particular in this moment, because so much of what was so broken before the pandemic, for some, I think there's this sense of like maybe now they're seeing brokenness, or now they're seeing violence that maybe they hadn't had in as much frame as prior, but nothing is new about this part of it. And I think for me, how this is shaking me like right to the core is this moment is that I feel like a liar when I'm asking people to participate in our institutions and our governance and our government, because this is just so broken. But that's, you say broken, it was designed to work this way, but it is now, I feel so unable to respond to this moment with my, with people. My agency and my collective power feels so at the end of that spectrum of, just so diminished. And so I just, to end this, I'd like to borrow something from a woman named Lana James. She's a public intellectual and a scientist in Toronto. And the last event I joined where she spoke, she asked us to take a minute, and I would like to take a minute to talk, or not to talk at all, a moment of silence of a minute, and happy to be all we do from my end of using time, to think about the people that have died and are dying right now. Because I think when we create silence and when we normalize what's happening, we are doing violence. And I would say it's a particular strain of the white moderate in our history of democracy, that by being quiet, we actually continue along with seriously violent things. So that's where I'm at, because truly that's where I'm at, and all the culpability for these things and where that is with me, and what are we going to do about them, which we're going to talk about. But could we take a minute, please, to stop and be quiet and think about the people who have both died in this year and past, and are currently right in the face of death, because our collective mechanisms to protect each other are not functioning properly. So let's take a minute and think about those people together.
Starting now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I think what we just did is also part of being agents within an open smart city. When we talk about the openness of naming things, creating space for complexity, but also accountability, different ways of thinking, also recognizing people that and different communities that are part of these conversations, and those that aren't, that are directly impacted by these very powerful forces that exist in society. So it's very, very important that we do what we just did, just to name it. So I'm going to ask Tracy if you could maybe kind of expand a little bit, maybe from the perspective of an open smart city. I think that kind of lends itself there. Maybe even kind of delve into the notion of the commons if you want.
So one of the things that I've been finding very interesting, I mean, there are many components to a smart city. One window into a city, there are many, but one that all of us are paying attention to these days are dashboards. Our cities are publishing them, our provinces are publishing them, the federal government is publishing them. What's very interesting in the publishing of those various COVID-19 dashboards, whether it be BI, whether it be CCAN, whether it be some other type of technological platform, or whether it be Esri and many others, what we're seeing is a consistent, standardized approach to aim to communicate from a public health perspective what is going on in respective cities with regards to different types of members of society. Some cities are doing much better than others, and some provinces are doing much better than others. One of the aspect of the comments is here we are living in our cities, and suddenly we are beginning to have conversations such as, well, our sidewalks aren't wide enough for us to walk and be safe. And so we need to widen our sidewalks. Our streets have too much space for cars and not enough space for people. So we need to widen the sidewalks and decrease the space on the roads, which we're seeing. So we're seeing suddenly citizens being actively engaged in closing streets. If you're not from Ottawa, but sorry, but if you're from Ottawa, closing Bank Street, only close Bank Street for Santa Claus and Pride Parade. Otherwise, Bank Street never closes, and now suddenly Bank Street gets closed. Sidewalks are getting widened. Parks are getting partitioned in a different way. Picnic tables are being put out all over the place, and they're getting used. People are outside doing things. So suddenly the city and the city structure matters, and people are asking for things. And one of the famous lines we talk often in academia is infrastructure is the substrate of a civilization and of a society, but you only see infrastructure when infrastructure breaks. And so we have seen suddenly a break in multiple aspects of our social, economic, political, and physical infrastructures that really haven't worked for us. We've known this, but suddenly it's come to the fore. The public engagement piece is really interesting for agency. So one of the issues that we were having with the City of Ottawa, with their public-facing dashboard, was that racialized communities weren't obvious on the dashboard. And then I met the dashboard team, and it's a big team. So it's a team of 6 or 7 that manage the dashboard, that update it every day, that deal with the cache and all these different technological issues that they have to deal with. But they said, look, we didn't put that information up because first we must work with community-based organizations in the city so that they're not blindsided by the data. And then when the information actually comes out, that they can start developing strategic actions to work with community. And that was the first time I have heard that in such a concerted way. In other cities, you have different forms of public engagement with community-based organizations, but I had never heard of that before in the City of Ottawa. And then suddenly how different communities were saying, well, if you're going to share this information, this is how we would like it shared, but give us some time so that we can communicate, we can repackage, we can translate it, and then we can go to community and help community where they are, and here are our issues. So that was a very surprise. So you look at the city and you don't see that. We only see the surface of things very frequently. We don't see what's going on inside, and we don't see the relationship between city and community-based organization. And this was the classic for me, where I hadn't seen that and I hadn't heard it until I spent time talking with community organizations. They said, yes, we've asked the city to wait and not publish that information because we're acting on the ground right now with our communities. So to me, that is another way of the city and public health officials using their responsible actions and being responsible actors in this space and deferring to the community-based organizations who know best how to organize and to help people in different ways. To me, that's a really beautiful collaboration of agency. What that's also done is it's brought all the equity-seeking aspects of the city, from human resources and so on, under one umbrella. And now that one umbrella is spanning these issues across the institution in what I would call a very open, smart city way. So we've often talked about system integration and systemic problems. So suddenly we've had catalysts in our societies here, other things that we're hearing from the United States that has shifted the conversation, that is allowing us to use this fracture, for lack of a better term. It is a kind of fracture that we've seen, or a little cleavage that we've seen in society, an opening for now. Hopefully it's not a temporary one. Hopefully it's one that will last, where certain actors that were not active members in a smart city discourse are becoming actors in an open smart city discourse, in the sense that homelessness organizations, anti-poverty organizations, equity-seeking organizations are suddenly part of the conversation. And that is translating into technologies, technological systems, and it is shifting the practices. So now when I'm at IT subcommittee, that's how they're talking. When I'm meeting the data analytics team, that's how they're talking. So I think we have, from the tragedy, and thank you very much for that 1 minute of silence, Bianca. From the tragedy, we are also seeing new opportunities, because people realize that they have a role to play. And at the same time, the city realizes that they can't do this alone either, that there has to be a collaboration on the ground.
Maybe to add to that, I think one thing that I've noticed as executive director of Open North, with kind of longstanding kind of relationships with different partners, different types of like collaborators over the year, in that moment, there's been a shift in the types of like alliances and the kind of the trust and interdependencies, when so much is at stake for the public good, to actually kind of shift the model of talking to each other and naming and framing problems that are in a way it's not that they're necessarily much more complicated, they're more complex, but because the stakes are so high, we're kind of embracing that complexity, and we're able to kind of honing in on what are the triggers, what are the drivers of that, and asking some pretty fundamental questions about the way that our kind of sense of community and our cities are built, and how we kind of stick together in that context. I'd like to shift to smart cities themselves. Again, from the perspective of a year in review, we'd be remiss not to talk about Quayside, although, it's not that it's an event that started in 2020, and arguably, I think it's not one that should end in terms of the learnings and how we apply them going forward. I want to ask the question reflecting on a particular reflecting in particular on the engagement process, because this is part of what we've talking about, meaningful and effective participation in the Quayside project. In hindsight, what would you have done differently? And pick, I know this is going to be tough, but maybe one or two. Let's do one. Okay, let's start with one thing, one element that impacted citizen agency that you would have done differently in hindsight. Let's start. Bianca, I'm going to give you more time to kind of expand on that topic. So maybe you start with a key point for you, and then we'll come back to you after Tracy and Stefan.
A key point for me would have been going more quickly and directly to pre-existing groups that are highly engaged in conversations with governments. And to coordinate, but I don't because a lot of this, now that there's been a bit of time between it wrapping up and now, only now do I understand the amount of the emotional element of this, that you get defensive and you get reactive and you just go. You're like, okay, what can we do? And I think, having not had that, my career, I've done a lot of different things, but I haven't been an organizer. So what that looks like, and to do that well, there's a lot to have done differently. And but that takes a distinct kind of knowledge that I definitely didn't possess, and I'm very, very slowly learning about. That's my personal response to that.
Cool, thank you. Tracy, and then Stefan.
A personal struggle is listening, and being able to do active listening with key actors, and not to go in with guns flaring. But another area that I wish that I knew a lot more about, and that areas where I think some action is going to be important, and that I wish I knew how to engage with it, is the financial sector. I don't understand enough about finance and financialization and banking and forensic auditing when it comes to big private-public partnerships and the nature of those kinds of relationships. And I have to say that I was blindsided by that part of the equation when it came to the issue of SidewalkLabs. And then I realized, you know, you go through your Rolodex of who you know. Well, I don't know any forensic auditors. I don't know any financialization experts. I don't know groups of people who can explain to me investment, housing, real estate, mortgages, land titles, and all of those really complex aspects that some urban planners know, but not all, and how to negotiate in that space. Like, how does that space participate in the conversation in terms of providing agency to citizens? Because those are decisions that are made at a very, very, very high level with big power and big money. I don't know how it works, and I don't know how most everyday people know how that works. And I think big capital is something that we need to understand more of. Yeah.
Thank you. Stéphane?
So it's difficult to come as the third and try to find something new and different. I'd say that probably how the city has been involved in the process. It really feels, and I wasn't deeply in it, but it really feels that it took time for Waterfront Toronto and from Sidewalk to understand what they could gain in terms of knowledge from the city, and just the simple fact that the city has some level of representation. And I mean, Toronto, like Montreal, is more and more looking into how we discuss those questions in public. So I really have the feeling that if the Toronto Council had been involved earlier in the process, the whole project could have gained better and faster insights of what's going on, what Torontonians feel or don't feel, and so on. So it's really something that maybe was not considered sufficiently in the process.
Thank you. And before I turn back to you, Bianca, maybe just my own kind of like personal reflection on that topic. And for me, what the Quayside project and process kind of raised, and just kind of riffing on what's been said so far from a personal basis as an open data advocate, which is kind of what drew me into the technology space, is how the open data movement in its initial kind of phase didn't focus explicitly in their advocacy effort to name some of the thorniest issues related to data privacy and like and things like that. And it was if we raised that, it would have been much more difficult to make the case by making more visible some of the risks that cities that we were speaking to might kind of create some kind of just maybe a aversion to kind of like making that first step of adopting an open data. And I think it kind of comes back maybe to that like preparedness to be an advocate in a very kind of complex environment with issues that are difficult to understand. And no advocate will be able to have the complete kind of interdisciplinary kind of grasp of the sophistication of all these intertwined kind of connected issues when we talk about that. So the elusiveness of the smart city in a way plays a disfavor to advocates and to be able to kind of, pinpoint at the maximum capacity their limited ability to exercise that change that they talk about. So I just wanted to kind of raise that as a reflection before maybe Bianca, you could expand on your experience in that context in Toronto.
Yeah, certainly. And my response is going to build on what everyone said and I think highlight it. And I'm going to read you something that I saw on LinkedIn. And I have to mention Anna Brendesu, a colleague of all of ours. LinkedIn is a bizarre site for what happens in the technology space. And honestly, I would recommend people get a LinkedIn account just for that. So yesterday or the day prior, the Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, okay, so not SidewalkLabs, Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, who, to Tracy's point, you may or may not remember, have a investment from the Teachers Pension Fund in, yes. Right? So back to the complexity of the financial component of this. I'm going to read you this post, and I don't need to add anything to it because I think you're going to see some of what unfurls in the concerns. So just let me read this to you. So today, Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners announced a $100 million transaction to develop a transformative clean energy project in California, creating the world's largest residential virtual power plant in partnership with Connect. Clean energy leaders David Hochschild, chair of the California Energy Commission, Obama climate lead Carol Browner, and City of Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf joined the announcement with Connect CEO Cisco DeVries and Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners co-CEO Jonathan Weiner. Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners also led Connect Series C, investing $20 million to support the growth of the company and its expansion into new markets. The project, called Resi Station, and Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners' backing of Connect, marked the first commitment from Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners' Resilia platform, aimed at making energy grids across the world bi-directional, transactive, and distributed. To scale up Resi Station and provide savings to California residents, Sidewalk Infrastructure and Connect are partnering with Google and leading manufacturers of connected home devices and plan to offer rebated smart thermostats to hundreds of thousands of customers. There is a lot going on in there. The reference to the previous administration's political power, the merging of the clean tech and the, the normativity of the good intent of this, the commercialization, the energy grids being bi-directional, transactive, and distributed. There's a lot in there. But that final piece about partnering with Google and the manufacturers and the home and the rebates, this is an entire political economy.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. That's an important testimony.
So that's it, right? And that was it. And now this is it in a different permutation. And so just to know that this all is moving around and is very much alive, and we need to go to it wherever it's emerging. But this is announced. This isn't, we're going to consult on it. This is announced. So that's what we also need to, this is a pandemic. Can you imagine this kind of power shifting happening in addition to just happening without, I don't know what the democratic process was around this, but in this moment, even if you could, who's there and how is this coming together? So I just share that back out to you for any reactions on any of those pieces.
Well, I think it goes in many ways, it goes back to the fundamental kind of issues of trust in whichever version of democracy we're in and how we understand that, and those that aren't, that are able to benefit with the lack of transparency and accountability. And so we need to be extremely vigilant, but vigilant when you're in the dark is extremely difficult to navigate. So I take that very, very well. I'd like to maybe ask, unless Tracy or Stéphane, you want to add something? Tracy, please. No, it's good. I don't mind. But I just want to kind of maybe set up Stéphane before. Like, I'm going to ask Stéphane maybe to talk a little bit about kind of the Smart Cities Challenge and some of the work that you've been doing in the Montreal context from Montréal en commun, just to kind of offer a bit of a different kind of perspective on the smart city model as it's been playing out, also with the charter that was newly announced recently. So Tracy and then Stéphane.
So one of the big things is if we agree that we live in a technological society, then we must also agree that part of how we ought to deliberate is with and for and about technology. So technology enables a technological society and a democracy, but it also means that we ought to deliberate these issues and we ought to think of data and technological citizenship. And I think the examples that we've seen with big tech, that we've seen with Cambridge Analytica, that we've seen with Palantir, that we've seen with Sidewalk, that we're beginning to even have questions with regards to contact tracing and so on, and how people came together very rapidly on those issues. It means that the discourse of openness has to be wrapped on to technological politics, but it also means that technology can't just be left in the corner of the chief technology officers anymore, or in the technology subcommittee of a city or a province or a government anymore. We ought to be engaged in technopolitics. And if there's anything that we've seen in the last year, is certainly issues of privacy, issues of surveillance, Bill C-11. I'm super excited to see how that's going to go. Seeing issues of, and on the one side we had Sidewalk, and on the other side we had the Open Smart City definition and the work that Open North has been doing with Open Smart Cities. And then, I'll pass the floor over to Stéphane, because Infrastructure Canada process was pretty amazing. And I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say, Stéphane, about what's going on in the city of Montreal with that, because it's amazing.
On vient de te passer le bâton, Stéphane, à ton tour.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez cette fois-ci? C'est bon?
Oui,
oui, c'est bon. Vas-y.
Yeah, so for what we're doing, for what we now call Montréal en commun, Smart City Challenge is the name of the process, and we've created a name for it. And the name really says it, and the subtitle that we have is a kind of what we call a community of innovation, and it's really try to see how we can work together on some different aspects. I won't cover everything, but the more we work and the more it really seems. So the initial part of our process was to work at the neighborhood level and see how smart city could be embedded at the neighborhood level, because we felt that it's where we can have some conversation. And the more it goes, the more it seems obvious that it's really the level at which we should work. And we have so basically the Smart City Challenge is the City of Montreal does nothing. We are working with partners who are doing it, and we are supporting them, and we are sustaining the vision and the orientation. But the city by itself, my team at the city, that doesn't do much besides supporting our partners. And the more we work, and the farther we are from technology, and the more we are with just low-tech experimentation to see what delivers added value to people. And I really find it interesting, because in the end, we will come back to technology, and we will see how technology can help us to somehow scale, make it maybe more efficient or more accessible or so on. But for the moment, we are working, for example, at the local level to improve mobility. And basically, one of the idea of our partner, which is Solo, and which started even before we won, was, okay, let's make some bike trailer available to share, because some people would like to just let go their car, but they cannot because of the grocery. But if they can access to a kind of trailer, then they can go to their grocery with that. And maybe we'll find things with smart locks and so on to make that more accessible, or maybe Dixie, which is our bike sharing system, could embed that approach into the system. But it's really about starting at a very humble level, and something that's not, and I would say flashy. It's not to criticize the other, but it's really to have a step back and say, okay, what's the simplest thing that we could do, even without technology, to work on that. And as we do that, we can start to raise question, okay, if I collect some data about what's going on, what will be the impact? If I try to anticipate on what's going on, I can try to do it at a small scale and try to understand and ask people, because what I'm seeing in larger projects that start big from the beginning is that you completely lose any level of detail. You just get high level of data that by nature will be somehow aggregated by the different tools that you use, and you lose all kind of depth, and you don't see the details. So starting small, starting at a local level, I hope will really help us to better understand what people see, to have a fine-grained view of what's going on. Maybe try it in different places with different setups, different categories of people, and see what are the differences and what are the similarities. And from that, it will be easier for us to build up knowing that we understand the impact, positive and negative, that we have. So that's really the kind of thinking. And frankly, we are far from, we're still 4 years till the end, and I don't think even after 4 years we will have covered everything that we would like. But it's really about understanding what we are doing and understanding the impact. And I really think that we can only do that at a small scale at first.
I think that speaks a lot to the nature of like the collaborative governance of partnerships in these types of like ecosystems with different types of agencies, some of which are like institutionalized, some of them are kind of more grassroots, and then how to, how the city has a unique set of like power and roles to be able to bring stakeholders together. And what actually really kind of stands out for me is kind of the balance that need to be struck between kind of enabling conditions, like setting up the stage for others to collaborate, while still being mindful that authority is what provides those enabling conditions. So recognizing that even if there's space, there's still a city that has a lot of power that's there as a funder and et cetera. But the tone and the approach and what you're naming, I think we would consider the open smart city approach to coming up with these types of innovations. Wondering if either Tracy or Bianca, if you've got any comments on what Stéphane just said. We're getting close to the hour. Obviously we're not going to be summing up every single issue in 2020 of all years. Once in a maybe I don't know. I'm not even going to try to pinpoint how big 2020 is. I'll leave that for other historians to do that. But maybe Tracy and Bianca. Tracy, go ahead, and then I see some head nodding from Bianca. Over to you.
So what I'm loving is, from what you're talking about, Stéphane, it's also capacity building. It's teaching people to be technological and data citizens from the grassroots up, right? And then through that process, you're learning, they're learning, we're learning. People, the back and forth. And I think we were talking about, agency. You need knowledge to be an agent, and this is one way that people can gain some knowledge in that particular context. But at the end of the day, we also get to decide. We don't have to adopt the model that was just read to us. We when I see Guelph with its closed food system and smart city, and I see Bridgewater and energy poverty, for crying out loud, right? We live with that in this country, and how do you address that? Côte Saint-Luc, they weren't winners, but a really interesting project on how do we keep our aged population living at home? If there's nothing we need right now, it's that, because of what we've just experienced. And then what's going on in Nunavut with the 24 maker spaces. And that was a conscious decision at a macro federal scale to change the discourse. I still want to find out the backstory of this, but to change the discourse and say, bring us your issues, bring us your problems, bring us your challenges, and explain to us how you're going to resolve these and how you're going to bring your citizens into the equation, into the resolution of these problems. So to me, that set the stage for another Canadian model. And then we have the open smart city definition and the work that is going on at Open North in self-assessment instruments, the development of procurement instruments, the education modules that you've developed in the organization, that is essentially saying, we don't have to do that other model. We're happy to work with different types of actors, and we can do this because we are our own nation state. And we have this really complicated federalist system of relationships between cities and the federal government and provincial and territorial governments in between. But people are learning from each other. People are watching and they're learning from each other, and cities are having conversation. And that comes from a long story of early days of open data, early days of open standards, early days of open source. And early days of community Wi-Fi, I know, Bianca, you're starting to think of community Wi-Fi mesh networks, but some of us come from those communities of having those discussions of how do we tinker with infrastructure, how do we build community infrastructure, and then how do we launch and manage and sustain community infrastructure. And then the last word I'd have to say is, this is not our first kick at the can. Remember anti-nuclear movements? Right? Remember rainforest conservation movements? Remember big dam movements, anti-movements, the Narmada dams and stuff like that? So the Brundtland Report on Sustainable Development, all of those kinds of things. And that's in fact the language we used. I don't think I told you that, John Way, but that was the language that I referred to when developing the Open Smart City definition, was going way back to the 90s and even earlier to the 50s with the commons in Antarctica as being the continent of science and the continent of collaboration. So we can do things differently. Sidewalk taught us that we better pay attention, and Bianca's work taught us that we better pay attention. So I'm very excited to see where we're going to go together on this. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I don't think it's impossible, because I'm seeing the tide shifting, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, Bianca, over to you. And I'm reading just the chat here. I'm seeing comments from the team at Open North as well, like that hope is essential, being able to inspire, which is so key in politics, as being human beings, as part of our human condition. Over to you, Bianca.
Yeah, and it's very much building on both the hope, the capacity building you mentioned, Tracy, and back to Stéphane, to what this opportunity I think has afforded us and will continue to. So, a couple of thoughts there. One of the ongoing debates I have with myself, sometimes in public, sometimes I just talk to myself about it, is this like digital government? What's with this term? I think it's become counterproductive. Now we're just thinking about tech, like government is government, right? And I think where I finally landed with this is in relation to time, when we think about how long the time scale is of everything, of of history. Considering these decades or 2 or 4 or whatever with technology as a transition time where we have to be able to name the thing a thing, but eventually having that capacity within government just being an assumed, and so it's just government and everybody can work on all of these issues, and there's maybe some organizational design changes to unsilo a bit of what's constrained in how cities work, and also to one of your earlier points, elsewhere, Tracy, jurisdictionally, like intra-jurisdictional operations with data and digital are huge, right? And so I think what I've been thinking about so much is that when our conversations focus on regulatory and other interventions as like policy, it's completely mitigating and defensive, right? And what we need to do is both mitigate and manage what's coming forcefully, often from commercial and very asymmetrical in power forces. So we need to be able to like deal with that, but really build this muscle. And this is part of the hope of the institution and what it could do to steer the what we want instead work. And to do this work concurrently is hard. Doing anything concurrently is hard, but I feel as though 90% of the oxygen in a lot of the technology and society debates are on the defensive mitigation. This is evil, this is bad, this isn't enough. And it's absolutely necessary to have all of that. But how do we reduce its volume and oxygen and crank up the what we do instead part? And I think that's what this Infrastructure Canada, the entire challenge is helping us. I think that's what Open Data has done. I defend hackathons until my end of time, not because of what comes out of them, not because anything from a product perspective, but the human beings that I know from my hackathon experiences. Back to the first thing I said about our society, it's relationships, right? It's the people you meet and the ways you stay in good relations along the way that. And how do we get the technology being built from different vantage points and perspectives, and not drawing on voices just to come in every time they're going to be hurt more? This is what I hate about the way our democracy is functioning right now, is you got to show up or you're going to get hurt more. It's a terrible, terrible positionality to assume when you want to have joy and hope. And that, I think, really nails where, for me, I struggle because I was a product manager. I viscerally know how different technology could function in society, and I do not know how to hand that feeling to others. And it doesn't, I just don't know. I can try to write, I write the same damn thing every year, 10 years in a row, and it's boring. But the problem is technology does not have to be capitalist in nature. It can be public, but it can be both. It can be lots of things, but I don't know how to translate. So I'm kind of ending off, and I got one more point on that. Like, how do we get that confidence to build these systems so differently so that they honor humans and relationships? And it's not from that point of like, not that thing. How do we make it a little bit less dangerous? It's a terrible way to design anything. Terrible, right? So I think what I want to end on in relationship with everyone on this call is I can openly say the thing I said at the beginning because all of us know and trust each other, and you all generously accepted what I said. And what I'm going to say here, I don't know how to talk about well in public, so I'm not asking anyone here to respond to it, but I want to make sure, because we also have content collapse, but this is something that I feel is very important for us to sit with. When I said white moderate, and when I say this, and this was never a passive aggressive point to the, like from white or white presenting people, you know, that as to the makeup of this discussion. The reason I say that is because we all need to assume our work, like if it's not now, I don't know when. And the diversity and inclusion and the representation politics is an element of the history of how we need to do better in sharing work. But there is structural work that a lot of people need to take on as theirs. White people in this country, and it is not time to read 900 books. Tomorrow morning, figure out in your meeting how you ask a question that's going to advance things like, how does this policy decision uphold our treaty obligations? You don't have to know everything about it, but if you're a unionized public servant and you can ask that question tomorrow, and not everyone can, but if you feel you can, you should. And let's start using our pre-existing power bases to push on some of this work and to understand that it has to look like everybody's work, right? And so I'm just touching on this because you were all so generously accepting of what I shared, because we have this trust and we all know what each other is arcing at. How do we build that more broadly with the people listening to our conversation and everyone in our lives? I think that has to be so urgent with all of us. And so I just wanted to circle off by making sure that that was understood for what it was. And I really adore the trust and the relationships we all have, that I can share that and everyone understood that, because we need to get better at even having those conversations. We cannot replicate D&I policies from before and think we're going to get this resolved, because that is old thinking. So there's more work to do. And a lot of that we have to realize it's our work, and it's our work tomorrow morning. So that's all. I don't need to say anything else. Obviously, we don't have time, but thank you for letting me try to get through that piece.
No, that's fantastic. And I think we're getting close to wrapping up. And I think you've done a terrific job of naming some kind of fundamental systemic issues that only in like us as individuals, as well as within a collective, we have not just a responsibility, but now we have an urgency. Given the interconnectedness of the issues and the stakes of not addressing those issues collectively and individually. So the taking personal accountability for what you've described, I think is a starting point, to go from mindfulness to impacting and having real effect, and kind of sacrificing also that positionality that is afforded to us in the discourse of citizen agency. So it's not easy to do, but it's something that we need to do. And for me, I mean, we're on the hour right now. The conversation we've had today, this morning with the workshop, with a few other colleagues, as well as right now, I think simply validates the need to for that. And I'm kind of stuck on the hope bit, because I think that's part of what we tried to do in defining an open smart city, is creating our own discourse, creating our own language on the terms that we want to fight the good fight in the public interest. So let's continue to do that. It's been an incredibly challenging year for all of us on an individual and collective basis. But it's moments like these, I think, that we need to kind of see the value of solidarity when we talk about these types of issues. So let's leave on that note. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Merci.